Hello, it's Black Bike News again. I'm going away for the weekend, so I'm giving you a double dose this evening. And this is about DWP can apply for driving bans to cover outstanding benefit debts. So I'm going to have to talk really quickly in order to keep within the 10 minutes. Okay, so the headlines read Department of Work and Pensions have been granted sweeping new powers to seize funds directly from bank accounts and apply for driving bans to recover outstanding benefit debts. The Public Authorities Fraud, Error and Recovery Act 2025 introduced new debt recovery powers for the Department for Work and Pensions. The relevant provisions were brought into force on the 24th of June 2026, and the DWP has published a code of practice explaining how they are intended to operate. The powers include direct deduction from bank accounts in certain circumstances and the ability to seek a court-ordered driving disqualification for people who repeatedly refuse to repay benefits debts despite having the means to do so. The government says these measures are aimed primarily at persistent debtors and fraud cases, not ordinary claimants who are cooperating with repayment arrangements. Supporters would argue that this is about fairness and protecting public money, and the key arguments are billions of pounds are lost through benefit fraud and overpayments each year. Existing recovery methods can be slow, expensive, and ineffective, particularly where people ignore repeated requests. HMRC and other public bodies already have forms of direct recovery power, so the DWP is not being given an entirely unprecedented tool. The driving ban provision is presented as a last resort, requiring a court process rather than being imposed automatically by officials. From this viewpoint, the policy is less about punishing people who are struggling and more about ensuring that people who can pay do pay. So, how is people who can pay do pay determined? According to the DWP's Code of Practice, it's not supposed to simply mean there's money in your bank account. The DWP says it must carry out an affordability assessment before making a direct deduction order. They aim to determine whether someone can afford deductions, consider essential living expenses, identify protected income, and look for indicators for financial hardship. In practice, they would look at things such as bank account information. The code says bank statements for the relevant account must be considered before a deduction order is made. The DWP expects to look at recent statements, normally at least 3 months, to assess the person's financial position. Income coming in, for example, wages, benefits, pension, or other regular payments. And then, of course, essential spending. The guidance specifically mentions considering essential living expenses that could include things like rent or mortgage utilities, food, and other necessary costs. Signs of financial hardship, that's another thing they look out for. The assessment is supposed to consider whether someone would be pushed into hardship. However, this is where the debate comes interesting. Imagine two people both owe the DWP 3,000. Person A has 5,000 sitting in savings, has regular income, has ignored repeated letters asking them to arrange repayment. Most people would probably agree that recovering money is reasonable, but what about person B? He has £800 in his account. That money is for rent, food, energy bills, or caring responsibilities. Their debt rose because of a DWP mistake or a misunderstanding, and that is where concerns arise. The question becomes, does a snapshot of someone's bank account really show their ability to pay? A bank balance can be misleading. Someone may appear to have money on Monday because their wages arrived, but by Friday that money may be committed to direct debits and essential bills. While policy acknowledges vulnerability and hardship consideration, how does that play out among people who are struggling to communicate with official bodies, have disability, or do not understand the debt process? The other interesting point is the phrase refuse to pay. The government's position is that these stronger measures are aimed at people who have the means to repay but deliberately avoid doing so. The driving disqualification route also involves a court application, and the court must be satisfied that the person had the means to repay and failed without good reason. But the broader social question is, who decides the difference between someone who is refusing to pay and someone who simply is unable to pay? A lack of communication or failure to make repayment arrangements may be treated as evidence that someone is refusing to engage, but it does not automatically prove that they are deliberately refusing to pay. There is an important difference between I have received the letters, I understand the debt, I have the money, but I'm choosing not to pay, and I have not responded because I'm overwhelmed, ill in hospital, or dealing with a crisis, do not understand what is happening, or cannot manage official correspondence. From the outside, those two situations can look identical to an administrative system. The letters have been sent, no response, calls made, no contact, repayment not arranged, no payments received. But the reasons behind that lack of response can be completely different. This is where issues such as vulnerability assessments become very important. A person may be unable to engage because of physical illness or hospitalization, mental health difficulties, cognitive impairment, learning difficulties, disability, bereavement, domestic abuse, or controlling relationships, where someone else manages their finances, literacy or language barriers, simply being overwhelmed by multiple debt and official letters. But do they send out officials to find out what the reason behind the non-response might be? No, because they simply don't have the resources to do that. A system relying heavily on engagement can unintentionally favour people who are confident navigating bureaucracy, while disadvantage people who are struggling the most. The argument from the government side tends to be people are given opportunities to contact us, explain their circumstances and arrange repayment. If someone repeatedly ignores those opportunities despite having the means to pay, stronger action is justified. However, that can be countered by non-response is not always a choice. Sometimes silence is a symptom of vulnerability, illness, or, as we have heard, death. Errol Graham's death is almost a textbook example of the danger of interpreting non-engagement as unwillingness. The tragic point is that, on paper, the system saw certain behaviours. He did not attend a work capability assessment. He did not respond to attempts to contact him. He did not challenge the decision. His payments were stopped. The later evidence showed that this was not a straightforward case of someone refusing to cooperate. Mr. Graham was a disabled man with a history of serious mental health difficulties. His ESA and housing benefit was stopped after he failed to attend an assessment, and he later died alone, emaciated in his flat. His body was discovered when bailiffs arrived to evict him for rent arrears. He weighed approximately 4.5 stone and had virtually no food in the property. The question becomes not only did this person contact the DWP, but why did they not contact the DWP? A fair system would need to distinguish between non-engagement as a deliberate avoidance tactic and non-engagement because of circumstances that prevented the person from acting. And when you add the driving ban in the mix, it could have consequences far beyond debt recovery, potentially affecting someone's ability to work, care for relatives, attend medical appointments, or maintain independence, particularly in rural areas. The real debate is not whether fraud should be addressed, but how do we do so without causing injustice to people who are already struggling? And that is the key thing, because, when you work in a government, everything is like a tick box exercise. You tick after 3 weeks, have you had a response? And if you haven't had a response, you send up an automated letter is normally generated. And it's not even like people are dealing with this. It's not like somebody says, oh, Mr. Smith, he hasn't responded. Shall we go and make sure he's okay? No, because they don't have the resources. There's cuts, there's this and that. And then poor Errol Graham, he was bloody dead. Send the bailiffs around and find out the man is dead. And they'd cut off his benefits because he wasn't responding. So this is really a tricky situation. I don't know how the government are going to deal with this, But let's hope that they're going to do so fairly and sensitively and with some compassion. And that's all I've got to say for now. Bye bye.